The only school that teaches you about money is the School of Hard Knocks. Until now.
You need to learn this business, and this is the time to do it.
Become an insider, so you have to know the rules before you get in the game.
Welcome to the Money MBA Podcast.
Oh, have I got your attention now?
Where you'll learn how to be a master of money.
There's so many ways to make money today.
Let me show you in 2 seconds flat why the rich get richer and the poor get poorer.
Now here's your host, Jon Kutsmeda.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Money MBA Podcast. Whew. I had to exhale there for a minute because I have quite the doozy of a show for you. Today, I'm welcoming Radigan Carter to the podcast. And wait, hold up right there. This wasn't even supposed to be a podcast. So keep that in mind. This is really a conversation that ended up going on. Are you ready for this? For 4 hours. So Radigan and I decided to connect, chat about a couple things that we seem to have agreements on, share some perspectives, and maybe get each other's opinion on some thought experiments we're having. And before we knew it, it was 4 hours later. Now, if you don't know who Radigan is, well, I might have to send you down another 4-hour rabbit hole because he had a conversation with Dimitri on Hidden Forces where they go into greater detail in terms of Radigan's story and how, some of his viewpoints on the world and markets and whatnot have come about. And I think you'll really enjoy that. But we spend no time here developing who he is. So you're kind of thrown right into this conversation between two guys who are really interested in sharing their ideas about a couple different things that, maybe it sounds at times that there's almost an echo chamber there because we have similar perspectives. But what I really liked here is if I shared an idea or he shared an idea, we could both kind of kick it back and add some additional color on it. And so for me, it was incredibly valuable. And look, 4 hours went by in a blink of an eye. And I honestly think it will go by very quick for you. But don't worry, I'm going to break this up so you can handle it in chunks. But please, without further ado, let's welcome Radigan Carter to the show. And I can't wait to hear your experience, your thoughts. Please share opinions, leave comments, all that fun stuff. Because, wow, this is going to be a journey. It was a journey for us. It was 7 a.m. his time, 10 p.m. my time. So you can really appreciate the enjoyment we had in this conversation and certainly the commitment to what we're doing in our lives as far as finance, markets, all of that, because it's early for him, it was late for me, and we just couldn't put the microphone down. So please enjoy. Welcome, Radigan, to the Money MBA Podcast. Can't thank you enough because this episode, in my opinion, will be one that will be very difficult to top anytime in the near future. So come along, let's buckle up for a 4-hour conversation on the Money MBA Podcast with none other than Radigan Carter.
Yeah, no, it's excellent because something I'd really like to talk to you about is get into more of your views on real estate.
Well, before I take the baton, maybe I'll throw one at you. And one of the things that I think,
Sure.
One of the things I think is interesting, kind of listening to your story and listening to you talk and reading some of the things that you've put out there, is there's definitely a bit of stoicism to it. A lot of that leadership mentality. But at the same time, and again, I think this is partly because I feel like there's a lot of similarities, maybe demographically speaking, but also just in terms of ideologies and how we think, and even in terms of how we're raised, and when I think about some of the things I've learned from my father, not by what was said, but what was done. I think there's a lot of similarities and impacts that has had on our lives. But when I'm looking through some of the things you've written, more so some of the things you've written, which, almost like gives me a chuckle because it's one of the things I wrote to you this morning or last night was like, some of the things that you say, or perhaps the way you say it is there's almost a bit of envy, because if it wasn't for some of the face I try to save in the business sense of things, I'm like, this is exactly how I would say it. So to kind of bring all of that rambling together, since I just kind of woke up from a power nap, do you feel like there's a bit of we always have a pain of some type that we're carrying and we're working through? Do you feel like there's you're kind of burdened in some ways, or at least motivated or driven in some ways by a bit of like resentment? Like there's a bit of like frustration, not only with people that we end up forcibly being surrounded with because of where we live and just what's going on in the world, but also just kind of going through the journey you did, working with the U.S. government, and in certain contexts kind of being under supported at times. But certainly in the tone you use in some of your writing, it's almost like you're a little frustrated with people in general. Do you feel like there's a pain there that you're kind of working through, or is it just like as a leader, you're just, a little irritated with how behind the ball and irresponsible people are with their own missions?
That's really interesting that you pick up on that, because
It's self-reflection.
it's yes. So on both counts, right? So, and at times I kind of wonder about that. The way I phrase it is that I'm very much aware that I've changed more than the world has changed. While I was overseas. So, and what I mean by that is there frustration there? Absolutely. But I'm also very cognizant of the fact that it's a frustration on my part. And if I try to express that, especially, and it's something that's come out more since I've been back in the States than when I was overseas, that if I try to express that, people are like, why are you frustrated? This is the way it's always been. And there's some truth to that, right? But I just yeah, it's there. And I think I get frustrated when people they let small things kind of set their life, because it's a lot of the things I see people worrying about. It's kind of like, hey man, that just doesn't affect you if you don't want it to.
Right.
You just got to decide that doesn't have any bearing on your life and just keep on going. And there's definitely frustration there over the lack of, I wouldn't say it's so much as frustration as it is realizing just kind of the reality of what a bureaucracy really is. So, and I think where the frustration comes from on that is people that I see advocating for more government control, or to have the government in charge of more things in their life. I have a frustration that I can't explain to them what a bad idea that is after having the government be in charge completely of my life and how horrible it was. But unless you've experienced that, they just don't even understand what they're signing up for, because they've never been basically on the far side of the moon in Afghanistan with no support. And so there's a frustration on that part of it too. And I think that's why I try to be very, that's probably why I say some of the things I do in my writing, is I try to be very real. Like I try not to make it overly flowery or dress it up in any way, shape, or form. If I think it, I really try to write it that way.
Right.
So hopefully it kind of gives people like a window into exactly kind of like what they're signing up for if they really want to go down that road. Am I explaining that very well?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think you're in a position where, and I don't want this to come off the wrong way, but I think you're in a position to kind of get away with that in a good way, where I feel like if I express some of that same type of attitude, which I empathize with and actually agree with, I think it can be taken the wrong way. And I try to work through that in my own way, because, I've had various conversations with Jason Buck about this, where it's interesting how in a lot of ways we're just designed the way we're designed. It's almost like in some ways we're kind of the Neos of the Matrix. Like we just have this like it's a bug, not a feature, to be able to kind of see the world this way, and in a lot of ways reject conformity and see the flaws in it. But I'm just a dude who's kind of taken his own path, and I don't have a lot of responsibility per se, outside of the decisions I've made for myself, the business I built, those who've committed to that business. But those are all, those were personal choices. Much like what we're talking about, kind of the path that people go on, oftentimes the things they get frustrated with or the roadblocks they hit really aren't that big of a deal. And it's part of a choice they make. But for me to kind of go out there and vocalize that, which I have done in the past, I think not in such a public setting, maybe in smaller email lists or client lists I have, it definitely rubs people the wrong way. But in your case, where you've seen so much and you've been kind of on the other side of the moon, right? And it's just funny, this early in the conversation, to hear you say to trust the government or to put, look for the government to support you, and how awful it was. I think it makes people. I think it's more effective in making people stop and listen to your words versus somebody just preaching to them. Like if I were to say it, it's just like, well, Jon, you've got a chip on your shoulder. If you got an attitude about this, you don't understand my plight. I think it's a lot harder for somebody to read what you're writing and to know your story, to kind of push back at you in that type of way. Cause it's kind of like, well, what's your excuse, mate? You know what I mean? Like, what are you really going to say as to why what I'm pushing on you is too hard for you to handle?
And that's kind of, and I kind of approach it that way on purpose, to where I try not to have too much of a, ideological bent to it. Like it's very much a practicality point of view for me, right? Because the experience, people that think that, oh, hey, I need to have the bureaucracy to be able to take care of me. I'm looking at it as, hey man, look, I've been inside that hamburger factory and I'm telling you, it's not pretty. Like you wait until your career comes down to a faceless bureaucrat on email that you can't even call to be able to go back to work, and you're going to hate your life. And I don't think that's, it's like you said, I don't think it's something that people really think about in that way until I can phrase it that way. And then hopefully it'll kind of opens the door for them thinking, hey, you know what? I probably need to take a little bit more responsibility for my own life.
So I think it's an interesting journey listening to that interview you did with Dimitri. And you could tell it was, even for him, there's a lot of human elements to it that I feel like, to me, it was kind of ironic listening to it because, a slightly change of tone here. Sometimes I feel like in that circle, in the financial world specifically, there's such a high bar in some cases. Guys like Mike Green, but in other aspects, there's just a lot of immature male ego, and I don't really know what it's almost like a reality TV show in some ways, but but there certainly is a lot of people that get attention simply because of their associations with, they've been in the Wall Street game for a long time, or and so it was really cool listening to how excited he was about what you were writing about, the story you were sharing. But the irony to me is I feel like there's a lot of guys like us out there. Like there's a lot of people who are autodidacts or who are maybe disenfranchised with some type of bureaucracy or some journey that they've been on, or some sort of dogma that was fed to them as, go to college and get a job and do X, Y, Z, and realize maybe somewhere along the way that there's a better way to do it. And I feel like for a lot of guys who are just kind of in this vessel or in this little circle, I don't think they realize how many Radigans are out there. And that's not to take anything away from you, because your story obviously is really compelling and unique. But I thought what was so cool about you getting to spend time with him and to have 4 hours of it, was the realization that, like, dude, just start sticking microphones in front of people and you're going to hear stories like this. And I think that's what's so exciting about right now, with whether it be podcasts or, the blog post I wrote and shared with you, is I just feel like we're entering this kind of like a renaissance of people taking responsibility for themselves. So on one angle, you kind of have this tone in your writing, which is frustration, which I completely share with, this excuses mentality. But on the other angle, I feel like we have this great awakening happening where people are like a little bit of, F the government and screw the system, and I'm going to go buy Dogecoin. And I don't think people really, really see what's happening there. It's not just the meme. It's kind of a sense of empowerment, if you will.
I agree, and that's where, when Dimitri and I were talking, there were a couple, because we had a 3-hour conversation before we even recorded that.
That's crazy. I believe it, but it's nuts because it's a lot of time. Yeah,
it is a lot of, well, and so when we were recording that, he was like, "Hey, we got to stop this first half. That was 2 hours." I was like, "We've been talking for 2 hours." And he says, "I know, it's crazy." So, but I told him the same thing, that because he was asking me about some things, and I told him, I was like, "Dimitri, like, what I'm talking about, like, this isn't rocket science. Like, all the guys I was over there with, kind of, feel the same way, have a similar outlook." And I said, "They're just not talking about it on the microphone with
right.
you." So I think you're 100% right on that. And even on the writing, like, I have been amazed at just how many people have found my writing from all around the world and will reach out and say, I mean, they contribute in just various ways, and it's from all different backgrounds. Like, I'll have a CEO of a mining company in Australia reach out and talk to me about something I wrote, or like a retired MD from Lazard's in Toronto that's growing a vegetable garden. Like, he'll reach out and talk to me about something. It's just kind of, and then it's just guys like myself. It's guys like us. It's younger guys too. Like, it's just all just a bunch of different people, and it's actually really cool to see how that resonates, because I think you're right on that. There's a almost an awakening happening, and what's interesting is the people that I would say did it the right way, as far as, went to the right schools, got their MBA, got their certifications, went to Wall Street and into finances. I think a lot of them are missing it. There's a, and kind of the way I almost think about it is I was reading Frankopan's New History of the Silk Road. I was listening to it on an audiobook. It was great. And what struck me was how, Rome and Persia were fighting each other until they basically exhausted each other, which let the Arabs come through and just sweep both sides in the 7th century, right? It was this threat that neither Persia or Rome had even considered, that eventually took out both empires. And for some reason, what I was thinking about, I was like, man, it's actually very similar to what crypto is doing to passive and active investing. That you have these guys who are, they used to be 2 and 20, maybe they're 1 in 10 now, active managers kind of competing against the BlackRocks and just the passive investing vehicles. And, really they're just two dinosaurs standing next to each other, not paying attention to what's really going to take them out.
Totally.
And and it's odd for, I think in a way, the way I feel about it is I almost have an advantage over the fact that I don't know what I don't know. So when I'm kind of on the outside looking in, looking at all this, for me, the risk that I have when I invest is I lose all my money. It's not that I get fired and have to go get a new job like these guys. And so when I look at it and I can see that, there's a crypto startup that's saying, hey, we're going to try to make this to where you can put assets on the blockchain, and you're going to be able to immediately audit and see what someone's track record is. And then you can actually stake your assets to them and have that be a part of their fund. and it's all done there in several seconds. Well, that's taken the place of prime brokerage, of a lot of back end work that is normally happening at a fund that you don't even have access to, plus auditing firms too. And I don't think people are even aware that that's actually coming online just out there right now from, a bunch of kids in Singapore, for example.
Yeah, and I think the timeline of these changes, it's kind of tricky for me to grasp, because the closest thing to me is what's going on in the real estate world. And anybody and I say this very tongue in cheek, but anybody who's not a realtor has a very probably low opinion of the value that a realtor is serving in today's market. And it's really funny to see that, because on one angle, I think you just kind of have a very high return on time or return on investment profiteering enterprise, which is, acting as a listing agent or sales agent in the real estate space. And the fact that this is a profitable use of my time versus, am I really providing a ton of value? And I think the more it almost feels a little bit like multi-level marketing. It's like the more you kind of start to go down and drink that Kool-Aid, you kind of lie to yourself about what you're really getting involved in, because you're so driven by profit or lifestyle or the prospect of both. And what's interesting about that space is, I've been in Hawaii I'm not there now, but most of the last 15 years, it's kind of where I built my businesses and kind of where I lived and did my thing. And I remember there was a gentleman, this is probably going back well over a decade now. But he was really, really early to building an API between the MLS data and a public interfacing website. And for a very long time, that was kind of like the board of realtors, if you will, kind of had a lock or gatekeeping that information, right? So you didn't know what the previous listings were or the listing history or what the comps were or all the things that were going on. So that was the value add. And they protected that data, ferociously, because that was really their edge. That was kind of where they could take claim into terms of what they were doing. And then you had this guy, who was really at that time above and beyond kind of an early website tech type guy, who built an API that was extracting the data from MLS and making it public. And then he went one step further and basically was kind of like a flat fee type of guy. So you've got all these other people in the business are charging 3% for listing fees, and then you got to pay 3% for the buyer's agent as someone who's selling their property. Then you got Homeboy coming in who's saying, hey, I'm going to do it for flat fee. And on top of that, look at all this information I'm giving you for free, which was really kind of like the Facebook model in a lot of ways, or a lot of internet marketing type of approaches, which is like, here's everything up front for free. And then I got this other little nugget I'm going to charge you later on if you want to work with me. And he exploded. He went from being like a nobody to top 3. And the real estate community went like completely ballistic over this, like almost like a witch hunt, wanting to like tar and feather this guy. And, here we are now at a point where you've got the Zillows and the Redfins, and now they have a monopoly on this information, and they dominate the world's biggest marketplace, which is the internet. And they're slowly coming out with these like robo buyer programs where it's kind of like, here's your price. We'll buy the house from you right now. Right. And they're hanging on, in my opinion, by the skin of their teeth without really stepping back and realizing and asking the question, what value are you still providing? Or perhaps a better question is, how can you still provide value in a way where you're relevant, right? And to bring it all together, it's kind of like you're seeing this in every aspect of every industry, whether it's Uber and taxi drivers, but specifically in the financial world, like you're pointing out, any type of transactional relationship or gatekeeping type of relationship that used to exist is being obliterated. And instead of acknowledging that and working to maybe still be a dominant and relevant factor by identifying a new value you can provide, all of these enterprises are working like feverishly to protect and control what they think is their like proprietary thing, which is really just at this point becoming free information and someone else providing a more fast, efficient, and maybe democratic way of accessing it. So you're right. I use the term all the time. You're watching, dinosaurs walk the earth right in front of you. And it's just so funny to me that they don't see it. More importantly, they feel like they're entitled to still roam the earth.
And what's amazing about that is, so, and because you're right, because whether it's real estate or investing is, when I'm sitting here and I'm saying, okay, why should I invest in your fund, which you don't even own a large equity stake of to begin with? And well, I provide the value of I'm actually running the fund. Well, hang on a second, man. If this was that great, you'd have all your money in it instead of wanting me to put all my money in it. And they're like, no, you don't really understand the risk management and the alpha I provide. And it's like, nah, I just don't believe that, like, and in a way, it's almost like they've drinking their own Kool-Aid. They've been, it's like you're exactly right. They've been entitled to, that they've been entitled to that money. And as a gatekeeper for so long, they can't imagine a world without themselves. Whereas, kind of what I think about it is, people that I think are going to do well in the future are the ones that are seeing this and they're actually not trying to hold on to that old way of doing business. And instead, what they're doing is saying, hey, I don't take any risks that you don't take. And I'm going to be transparent of what I'm doing. And if you want to go do your own thing, that's fine. But this is what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. And I think that because I think part of the reason why Bitcoin and blockchain have really taken off the way they have is because we've tried to remove personal responsibility from the world, and no one trusts each other anymore. So, the reason that I was able to do the work I was able to do overseas was because I just never lied to guys. So I didn't bluff, I didn't lie to them, I didn't sugarcoat anything. There was a ton of times where they didn't like what I told them, but and they would even say, hey, we don't like Americans, but we like you because we know that you won't lie to us. And I think people underestimate that power, that if you have, you're not trying to be sustainable, you're not worried about the governance, you're not worried about a contract, you're just trying to be personally responsible if you said something. And I think if you take that approach to things, that people respond to it. And in whatever future we're going to, there's always going to be people that don't want to pick out their own house, right? Or they want someone to hold their hand while they're buying a house, or they want someone to to bounce ideas off of and do their investments for them. There's always going to be people like that. And really, I think the value you provide is no longer as a gatekeeper, but as someone they trust to actually to do those things for them. And I think that's kind of, to me, that's kind of where I think is the edge that's going to be in the future for those people in those businesses. It's almost going to be a boutique approach, which when you think about it, it's actually a very old way of doing business.
Yeah, I mean, Radigan, I mean, that's again why I was looking forward to this conversation, because I feel like there's going to be a lot of these, I completely agree with you type moments, because it's very much the sense for me too is you're gonna, I mean, it's, I don't think it's necessarily like a groundbreaking thing to say. It's really just being observational, but you're going to keep having consolidation. It happens even outside of a disruptive, environment, which we now are in. Everything is being disrupted, and we're seeing these huge changes in the industries that for so long have held the throne. But I don't even think it's necessarily that. It's just something that you can just, if you step back, you can see it happening. And there's just going to be consolidation. It happens in all industries and all businesses. Now it's just happening at such a rapid pace and at such an intense disruptive level where you're really almost like wiping out entire industries. There's always going to be, and there still is. I'm not taking the piss out of anybody here who's really providing value in whether it be real estate sales or anything else. I just don't think you need 1 million realtors. And you can't sit there and tell me that 1 million of them are providing a 6% value for a transaction that's basically seamless. Hence, like you're saying, blockchain and DeFi, it's proving that. It's like, why am I going to pay a bank $60 to wire money when, I could basically do it for nothing? Assuming Ethereum gas fees are low. But that's kind of the thing that I think people are missing the opportunity on, because I think it's giving you a chance to say, hey, what can be my unique value, so that as this consolidation happens, I'm one of the boutique firms or boutique value providers because I do something that nobody else can. I think it's such a golden opportunity to really anchor in your name in a space that doesn't have many chairs left or won't have many chairs left. And on the other side of that, if you're ultimately getting squeezed out because you're not special, like, this is a time for you to ask yourself, what does make you special, and kind of go all in on that. And this is something in terms of my ideology, that I'd like to get your thoughts on. I feel like more and more there's this democratization of access, right? In terms of the barrier to entry to just about everything is being obliterated. Crypto is kind of like anybody can participate in VC tech. I think it's also anybody can participate in the casino, which used to be Wall Street, is now the casino, which is crypto. And there's no longer this your accredited, non-accredited bullshit that forces people into low-fee bank accounts while these hedge funds and Wall Street guys gamble with your money. And if they blow up, no big deal. They move on to the next thing. I think it's now, creating this level playing field in a lot of ways. But the main point I want to make in regards to that is I feel like now there's this, especially with crowdfunding, and this is my main thing that I think personally has me so excited about entrepreneurs and people taking responsibility for their future, is that I feel like with crowdfunding, you now, especially with the new Reg CF where you can raise up to 5 million, anyone who's got an idea now has a real fighting chance to go out there and prove to an open marketplace. Screw the VCs. You don't need to sit there and be, belittled in front of a bunch of people who hold the purse strings. That's a whole nother community. As someone who's on the verge of doing a tech startup, that I've started exploring more. And dude, I know you're involved in FinTwit, in financial Twitter. VC Twitter is a whole nother world. And it kind of makes me chuckle sometimes, because I'm like, here we are again, another community that has been the gatekeeper to something for so long that doesn't see this thing happening. Some people, I think, are embracing and saying this is a great thing because now these ideas can be vetted in their own communities before we even come in as a, seed or Series A type investor. But I think with these crowdfunding types of things and this kind of renaissance of the U economy and the rebirth of the entrepreneur, people can now say, I've been okay at being a mortgage guy or a real estate agent or whatever it is that I do and have been doing and has provided me a living. But now I have this opportunity to go, I'm really good at teaching people how to garden, or I know a really, unique way to make this super high nitrogen organic soil. I don't care what the idea is. You can now go to the market and say, hey, invest in me. And you could never do that before. And you'd have to be underwritten by Goldman Sachs, right? Or you'd have to IPO after some ridiculous 5 years of VC investments where, it's all marketing anyways, because none of these companies are making money. All of that changes. And I couldn't be more excited for people in the wake of this massive disruption. So I stole the stage there for a little bit. So feel free to comment on a lot of the things I just mentioned.
So I think, what you were saying about how flat the world's becoming, because a lot of these gatekeepers are being taken out to where, technology just makes all this available to everyone. At the same time, though, I think that's going to be overwhelming for a lot of people. So the key value add, I think, for people that want to weather that storm and actually come out even better on the other side of that, is to, like you were saying, okay, what to, maybe not even what I have a passion about, but like, what am I good at? Because sometimes, what you enjoy isn't necessarily really where you have a skill at. And I think people that really carve out a niche for themselves, that people can, I think it really just comes back to trust, that people can trust that, wow, this person does the right thing and I don't have to worry about it. And, they're doing things that I trust because they're doing it in their own life, and I can see it online, right? They do YouTube videos, they, whatever it is, they're just very transparent. And so I'm going to trust them to do that, because that's one less thing I have to worry about in all this noise that's coming at me constantly 24/7, because it's just very hard to filter everything. If the world's flat, it's also very hard to filter everything coming at you too. So, I think there's going to be a lot of a lot of opportunity for those boutique offices like that. Almost very similar to Airbnb, right? So, when I travel, I love to stay in Airbnbs because there's nothing I hate more than the Marriott Rewards program. Because there's no one accountable for it. There's no one responsible for that. It's almost like they just try to, it's like they try to screw me on the rewards program. It's like, oh, sorry, you missed out on this date, or, oh, no, that doesn't necessarily qualify for this. Whereas when I travel with an Airbnb, like, someone meets me, hands over the keys, and actually wants to make sure I have a good stay because that's their place.
Yeah.
Like, someone's responsible, like an individual in Athens, Greece is responsible for that balcony. So I love that responsibility theme. But, and I lost a train of thought on that, but what were you saying?
You're talking about trust mainly, and this, people doing things that are not necessarily a hobby, but that they're good at. And
so, and the other side of that, right, is I would say you and I are embracing this, but I don't think that we should underestimate the number of people that are going to find this absolutely terrifying. And I would say probably, if not, like, breaking it down by generations, right? If not boomers, who are pretty much on the way out, they're the sunset of the careers coming down. They're already looking forward at retirement. But I actually have a lot of empathy for, I'm going to say Gen Xers who, because they went through the university programs, have their shingle hung out, have their certifications. And now all of a sudden you have an entire generation of us. And I would even say people that are younger than us, even more so than, because I'm 40. I don't know how old you are.
I just turned 41 about a week ago. So.
Okay.
So 1980 baby.
So yeah, same. And so, so I would say even like the generation coming up behind us, right, that those certifications matter even less to them. Like, they would literally trust someone investing off YouTube more than they would someone handing them a prospectus and talking about their CFA and going and what MBA they have. And for those people, like, I actually have a lot of empathy in the world that kind of the destruction that's coming for them, so to speak, right? Because it's really going to knock out the pillars of what they've built their career on. And I don't think a lot of them are going to be able to. I don't think they're either going to be able to, or they just don't want to pivot to where the world's going. And so almost in a way, when I see the pushback, like I kind of understand where it's coming from on an emotional level. Like I wouldn't like that either if I was 10 years older and, I still had another 15 to 20 years of working life left and still had, $700,000 to pay off on my mortgage. Like I wouldn't like being told that I was going to be redundant in, another decade either.
Well,
So I think there's that aspect of it too.
Well, and it goes, and again, so I feel like the point you're making about trust becomes even more relevant in this context, because trust used to be going to a doctor's office because, and maybe this is not the greatest example, but I'm still going to use it. You go to a doctor's office, number one, they're a doctor. So you're like, okay, I know they're a medical doctor, but you go into the office or into the waiting room and they've got like their degrees and their certificates hanging on the wall. And that's trust, right? They're reinstating the fact that, hey, I've done my studies, I'm certified, I'm qualified. And I feel like the element of, and in some cases, this isn't a good thing. This is going to be a bad thing, but the way we verify or vet people or establish trust is really changing, right? And it's the institutions that you used to have to go through to become certified, trusted individual in whatever things that you wanted to pursue or be professional of. They're just as archaic and are dinosaurs of the past as well. I mean, I have older brothers, and this is a conversation I try to have with them delicately because I just feel like they're not ready for the paradigm change. But with their kids, like my nieces and nephews, I'm just like, why are you saving for college, right? Like, if you think your daughter's going to college in 8 years, number one, you're screwing this up. And number two, you're really not paying attention. And, as far as like that even being part of somebody's reality still, it really puts in context the point you're making, where they are in a lot of ways unwilling to let go of the reality that they exist in because they're just not prepared for all the knock-on effects, at least philosophically, that come with accepting this huge monumental shift that things like college are no longer relevant, certifications no longer necessarily relevant in a lot of ways. Like, do you have 50,000 Twitter followers is now the new diploma. And that's not necessarily a good thing, but in a lot of ways, that's kind of part of this, you're being vetted by a community. And I think early adopters to the internet kind of got that, right? This social proof concept, but now it's literally like becoming part of community law. So I guess my question to you then, in terms of this conversation we're having, is why you? Why us? Like, is it kind of like I said, the Jason Buck viewpoint? Like, is this not a feature of us? Are we a bug? Like, why is it, do you think that you have this open-minded perspective and you're kind of embracing this wave and you're taking full responsibility? You didn't learn finance, right? Like, now your focal point and your mission is generational wealth. Why do we see it? Why do we pursue it and the average person does it? Is it we've got a bug, we're programmed differently? Is there something else going on? And I say that in the context of like, how do we get more people to join the mission? Because I think they're missing out on absolutely generational transfer of wealth and a once in a lifetime opportunity to do amazing things with their life.
Well, to continue the Matrix analogy, right? I would say that, I didn't choose to be woken up, right? Like, I was woken up by force, which is, I had something traumatic happen to me. And then I realized that the same, sacrifice and trust I had in the system, like, it wasn't reciprocated. And it wasn't reciprocated at the time that I needed it most, when it should have been. And, and part of that was a faceless bureaucracy, but also part of that was, the older generation that just had poor leadership. And I just got a really bad dose of it. And, and it's easy to say, okay, well, that was just that one group of people. Well, then I went to another continent and had something very similar happen to me. I had one of my guys get stabbed in Africa by an ISIS attacker, and I turned in a report on it, and I wasn't even allowed to say it was a terrorist attack in the paperwork. And when you see that, right, when you see that reality is no longer allowed to be reality because it's not the politically correct thing to say, or doesn't conform to what is, I'm going to say, accepted dogma, right, of that organization. You start really having to reconsider, is this organization really going to make it? Like, how competitive can you be if we can't even see the real world as the real world anymore? And so, for me, like, I just kind of had that forcible conversion, so to speak, to where, because then it wasn't pleasant. It wasn't pleasant to realize that, something that I had dedicated over a decade of my life to just wasn't what I thought it was in a lot of ways. And so, it started, so kind of forced awake there. And then when you start questioning things, you know, you if once you kind of get awake like that, you really start wondering, okay, well, where do I start? What else is out here that I thought was right, that or true, that I might need to take another look at. And then you start just kind of going down the rabbit hole of everything, history, finances, whatever it is. And I think you just kind of find like your niche, like what you really want to focus on. And even how people say, hey, I really like your writing. I never took any creative writing classes in college. I was an engineering major, and kind of to your point on degrees going away and things like that. Why would you ever go, and I'm going to pick on creative writing, but like, why would you ever go to a liberal arts degree, give 4 years of your life and $80,000 to get a degree in journalism or writing? Just start writing on the internet, and people are going to either find it and like it, or they're not, and you're going to know you need to do something else. But, I would say, like, it was, for me, it was being forced awake by that event happening. And I guess that's kind of why I think I have a lot of empathy for people that disagree with me, because when I get it, I just kind of think, it's okay, man. You just you haven't had that moment yet to where you're viewing life the same way I am. And that's okay. I'm not trying to make more enemies, and I'm certainly not trying to be another windmill for you to tilt at like Don Quixote, because at some point, I feel like what I can do is I can put the information out there of how I think and how I kind of arrive at decisions as I'm looking at things. And if people disagree with it, that's fine. But I think being as authentic as I can, as far as my view of things and what I'm looking at and the decisions I'm making, that at least might help people who do find it and have been questioning things in their own life to find their own path.
I mean, I want to focus in on something specific in that, which is at least something I'm extracting from that, which is a pain threshold. How many? Because you had mentioned, you see other people kind of go through it or kind of have this. In your case, your military experience and going through some of the bureaucracy there. How many people, and it's not a quantifiable number that I think you can just spit out, but more anecdotally speaking, how many people just don't have the pain threshold that perhaps you did, where it's like, it's like boiling the frog slowly, like they'd rather just cook in it and ignorance is bliss, versus where you took it, saw it, and instead of like bottling it up and ignoring it, you kind of went on a rampage, not literally, but you kind of decided to break out of that game, go down your own rabbit holes, and kind of have a sense of independence. How many people, again, it's not like you have a number you can quantify it, but maybe comment on, in your experience, people who maybe just don't have the same pain threshold and therefore shut it down. Because I feel like whether it's in the military or anywhere else, I think for a lot of people, they're just not prepared to accept the pain that comes with reality.
I was just having a conversation about this very thing yesterday, actually, with another former federal agent, because what we were talking about was how a lot of guys. I think there's a lot of dudes out there that are living in lives of, I'm going to call it like quiet desperation, right? And they know a lot of the things that we know, but they just can't make the leap. And I would say they can't make the leap because there's fear there, right? And I try to be very understanding about that because for if you're gonna do what we did overseas, right? Think about it this way. A lot of guys, they were former military, they have a degree, they went through a 2-year vetting process, another year of training, their initial, field office tour, and they're finally like in the career, like, tip of the spear, whatever you want to call it, to where they're at the very peak of what they want to do as a career. And when they get there, after what's for a lot of guys was anywhere from a 3 to 5 year journey, right? That takes a lot of discipline to pursue something like that. And they get to that, and then it's not what they thought it would be. It doesn't make them happy. And that's a very, very fragile thing when you're dealing with guys who they basically were chasing their dream for so many years, and then they find out they don't even enjoy their dream.
Right.
And especially for, I'm going to say, like, a lot of very type A people, that's not something like you ever discuss at work. Hey man, this thing that we spent years chasing, and all this prestige that we have, do you ever get up in the morning and just think this isn't what you want to do with your life? Like, those are words that are never ever uttered anywhere in the world. Like, no one ever says those words. And so it's kind of like, it's almost like, you're an archipelago of 1,000 islands, as far as that desperation goes that you're feeling, to where you never talk about it. And I think it's a process too, right? I mean, you're talking to me 3 years into this journey from, when I left government service. There was, I wouldn't necessarily classify it as, guys either like stamp it down and don't address it, or guys that do. I think it's just, and I think a lot of it's kind of what responsibilities you have in your life too, right? I mean, if you're married with 2 kids, you really can't just, turn in the gun and badge like I did and just walk out of the fort. That wouldn't be very responsible. But because I have friends that are still in it that, I talk to them, and, the conversation we're having, I have with them, they see it too. They're on the inside and they see it. But I think some guys will, you kind of hit that. I think you hit a point to where it almost becomes so physically painful for you. You either find a way to deal with it and stay, or for whatever reason you got to stay, or you hit the threshold like I did, to where it's like, hey, I gotta pull the ejector and get out of here. And they're like, hey, what's the plan? I'm like, I don't know. Hopefully I just don't burn up on impact, but I can't stay here. I got to go.
Right.
And it's kind of, but until you hit that point, you're just kind of, it's a process. But I think eventually you hit that point to where you either make peace with it and, like, you just never discuss it, or you leave. One of the two.
Yeah, and I don't know the exact quote, but there's definitely something. There's a fancy way of saying, like, change doesn't happen until you can't, tolerate the pain anymore.
Yeah.
Like, you need to kind of hit that threshold. And that's where I think over the years, where I've been very vocal, and pressed hard on people to kind of suck it up and pursue things they're passionate about versus what people tell them they should do. I think over the years, I've learned to be more empathetic in terms of, everyone's got their own journey and their own timeline that they're going on. But it's also very much, I think, a matter of, I don't think anybody, it's their cross to bear one way or the other. And I feel like you can rub someone's nose in the truth all you want. And sometimes you get more, with honey than you do with vinegar. And so in terms of the writing you do and some of the ways that you put it bluntly, I think that's, for the majority, the best dose of medicine that can be distributed. But there is definitely a cohort that they're just not going to respond to that. And I've even seen myself, in terms of the tone and the way I communicate with people, I'm way more gentle with how I spill, a hot bowl of soup of reality on somebody's lap, because it's, you're only, I feel like you're only gonna get so far with that with some people, but whether they take it and do something with it or not, at the end still doesn't change reality. And to give a little bit of backstory on me, I graduated college and I had a math degree and a certification to teach high school mathematics. And for me, it was very much like a jump off point. I was going to do it temporarily, have summers off. You get into the right district or school system, they'll support you through a master's degree. And eventually I was going to pursue something that was closer to engineering or physics based. Dude, it did not take long. Within a month of doing that, I realized it wasn't for me. And I had the moment that you and I are talking about right now, where I just spent 4 years pursuing something and gaining all this knowledge, and the real cold, harsh reality that this isn't what I want to do, and I really have no idea what I want to do. And we're kind of in that, like, we're not really Gen X, and we're not really millennial. And so,
oh, tell me about it. It's just like this awkward in between.
Yeah, and so a lot of people in that age bubble or that age bracket, when they experience that type of situation, and a lot of people did, what they did was they doubled down on student loan debt and went and got their master's, as if suddenly they had epiphany and knew exactly what they wanted to do, even though they were completely oblivious 4 years ago. That's kind of how I ended up in Hawaii. I was like, I kind of took a sabbatical and wanted to just let things unfold for themselves and decide what path I was going to go to after, maybe spending a little more time thinking about it. And I feel like a lot of people ignored that introspection and that taking the time necessary to really maybe digest what's going on around them, what's happening in the world, what they really like. But again, I think it's a part of it's a programming, right? Like the way I responded to that situation was dramatically different than most people. And for most people, they curl up in a ball and they go, "Oh, I'm going to go back to university. I'm going to get my master's." And it's like, well, you're not focusing on the problem. You're avoiding the problem, which is you really don't know what you want to do. And that's actually totally okay. And I think in a world of Gary Vaynerchuk's, right, where that's becoming more and more the message, it goes back to my point about this shift that we're having, where it's okay to be an entrepreneur. It was never cool before. And now we're kind of in this phase or this age where like being an entrepreneur is cool. And that's also dangerous, because I think for a lot of people, they're not cut out for it and they don't have the pain threshold that we're talking about. But I still would rather them take that journey, walk through the fire, so that they can experience in a very harsh, all at once type of way what they're really not cut out to do, versus this long, cute journey of studying in 4 years and all this shit and a ton of debt, and then come out on the other end just as clueless. And with that, one last point I'll make is I hear this all the time too when I share some of what I've done with my life and the travels I've been on. And talk about living in Hawaii for so long, I get the response like, "Oh, Hawaii, that's amazing. You're so lucky." And I don't hold back. I say, yeah, it's lucky. I bought a plane ticket. You know what I mean? Like, people create these barriers, and it's like, dude, luck had nothing to do with it. Look at the map. There it is. Go on Expedia.com and pick which flight you want to go to and pack your bags and you're gone, man.
Thank you for listening to the Money MBA Podcast with your host, Jonathan Kutsmeda.
It's also my pleasure to see to it that decent, hardworking people in this community aren't robbed blind by a pack of money-mad pirates.
To access more great content, visit us online at moneymba.com.
That's where the money is. And more than that, control.
There's only one person in the world to decide what I'm going to do, and that's me.
And I am deadly serious about that. That's it. I'm done.